Okay, today is November 13th, 2013. Call the meeting of the Brattleboro Planning Commission to order. The first thing to do is approve the minutes from October 16th.
I move to approve the minutes from the last meeting of October 16th.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Say aye too. Announcements.
We don't have any.
Okay. There's no public here, so we'll skip public comment and go right on to our subdivision regulations.
Pretty efficient.
Yeah, well,
I got whiplash.
Whew, bang, bang, bang.
Or jet lag, I can't decide.
Yeah.
I miss our public, but it makes things faster.
You know,
Yeah.
they're watching.
Yes,
They are.
yes.
I saw some of our public at the library. What's that guy's name who came all the time for a while?
James.
James, yes.
James, the chair emeritus of our board.
Yes.
Good.
Sorry.
Separate from Michael Bosworth.
Right.
Ouch. All right. Subdivision regulations.
Maybe we can strike that from the record.
Yeah.
So what you have before you is, I think, what I feel pretty comfortable with after having a discussion about it and maybe some minor tweaks is kind of, headed towards a draft that we want to take out there and get feedback on, before we set a public hearing, or at least do some education on and feedback. So hope that you've had a chance to kind of look through it. There's been no changes to Article 1. Article 2 has several changes that maybe we want to go over. On page 4, kind of expanded the waiver authority on it's E on page 4. And what this does is says,
Do you think that's you?
Could be. Could be there.
If you just shove that door open, you can find out, that,
Just, send it out the door.
I'm not going to say. No. So the DRB has waiver authority over two different areas of the subdivision regulations. So the first area is that they can waive application requirements. And then the other is that they can waive a standard, which is the standards are in Articles 3, 4, and 5. So basically, if you want to apply for a waiver of the application requirements, so that's saying that you need to submit like a stormwater and erosion control plan, like you're not going to do a waiver, you're going to have to put in writing why it's not applicable and why you're requesting.
Yeah, I read those. They look good.
And then the
Was
other,
that in the other one?
Thorough.
Is this something new? I mean, I'm just asking a silly question, but
it's expanded a
I'm
little
not
bit. There was
familiar.
waiver authority, but the second part, I think, it gives the, it expands the criteria for granting a waiver for the standards, and it also makes it really clear that the applicant needs to ask for the waiver and that the DRB is going to need to make a finding. I think that's a little loose in the existing regulations, and it's kind of done informally, like, it's just not a formal process right now.
I think people just assume that they can have whatever waiver they want at present. That's what it seems like.
Well, I think, yeah.
Yeah. So,
And some of the standards don't apply, and they're not going to apply to a particular subdivision.
Right.
But there's been no kind of formal process
to
to
say.
go through saying we're granting a waiver on this and this and this.
So this basically makes it easier also for the DRB in a way. I mean, it gives them,
they have to be clear that they're giving a waiver, and they have to use criteria for determining whether
Yeah.
the waiver is reasonable or not. And so, without wanting to go into too much detail, I'd say currently an applicant can come before the DRB and identify that they need certain waivers and just sort of request them as a matter of course, and then the DRB will grant them as a matter of course rather than explicitly discussing each one of the waiver requests and the criteria that you need to review before you actually granted the waiver or not.
So it makes it clearer, really.
Yeah.
And much more concrete.
Right. Right.
I know you don't like waivers particularly, Liz.
I like this.
But you're okay with this?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's move on then.
Okay. On page 6, another thing that I heard a little bit is that what's the criteria, right? What is the criteria that the DRB is reviewing a subdivision on? So I put in the criteria for a preliminary plan review, so that's C, action on preliminary plan. And so 1, 2, 3, 1 through 5 are the criteria that they're going to look at for a preliminary plan.
This is in section 2.4.
Yes.
Yep, 2.4C.
Yep.
Including that they're going to take up the waiver request at a preliminary.
What would happen if they didn't? If they didn't make their deadline?
The 45 days? Which
Yeah.
deadline? Well, I'm not really there's such thing as deemed approval, but actually deemed approval is a court remedy.
Yeah.
So basically, if an applicant feels aggrieved because the DRB hasn't issued a decision within that 45 days, they can take an appeal to the Supreme Court, or to the Environmental Court. And they'll basically say that the relief they should be granted is approval.
I think we should put something in there saying that if for some reason the DRB doesn't make it within 45 days, they don't get automatic approval.
They don't get automatic approval?
And that's the way the law is if the DRB doesn't get its ruling back within 30 days. So I don't think we're outside that target. I don't really understand what does happen. I know the Supreme Court says you don't get automatic approval.
Yeah, what's weird about it is you get it's deemed approval, but you actually have to spend months establishing that you can have deemed approval by going to the environmental court.
Yeah,
And, it's sort of like it's the most unsatisfactory relief that you could imagine. It's like,
Well, if they don't prove it, then does the DRB write them a letter saying, I know we've reached the deadline, but we need an extension of time to figure
I don't think the DRB is empowered to do that.
No. I think it can be like, the applicant could probably come back and say, I'm going to, file. They're either going to take them to environmental court, or they will, maybe the DRB would say, listen, we messed up.
Well, I mean, what's the scenario?
See if they can get an extension from.
Let's work through what's happening at the DRB a little bit. So,
I was just thinking a garden variety screw up.
oh, that never happens.
I mean, in the most, the worst case scenario, the DRB would not act as a way of retaliation against the applicant. That would be the very worst case scenario.
Yeah, but I think,
Yeah.
then they would have a remedy through the environmental court.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that,
Yeah.
if there was some kind of revenge
Yeah.
thing,
that
that
would
would be grounds for an appeal straight off.
Yeah.
If you could,
So,
But then,
do we
I just don't want
do
there to
we need
be
to
an automatic approval of a plan that wouldn't have otherwise been approved if, say, the chair has to go to the hospital or whoever's filling in for him, this is one of the applications.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we could get into the whole thing. I mean, it could say failure to issue a decision within the 45 days does not automatically grant approval, but the applicant can appeal to the environmental court for.
I guess my challenge is if
There's
there's
kind of a caveat to it.
if there's a case law step here, I don't think we can necessarily subvert or write our way around the case law, which is if the 45 days is statutorily
statutory.
provided, and so there must also be a mechanism for relief that's statutorily provided. So
It's not very clear, though, actually.
Yeah,
That's
that's
the weird part.
that's the issue about it.
Well, that's what I was thinking about, but let's not mess around.
All
We're
right.
going to tread new legal ground.
Well, that's what I'm okay with that, but you just need to be really clear that we're making stuff up.
Yeah.
But,
The heck with it. let's do
I'd
12
rather
months.
take precedent, you know.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, you get directed to 6.5, and
Right.
then your relief requested is going to be approval of the plan.
Right, exactly.
I'm sorry, never
Yeah.
mind, let's move on.
Our DRB will never be late.
Yeah, right. This is a major
You both
motivator.
on the DRB?
Yes, yeah.
All right.
Well, so that was added. On page 7, in 2.4D, originally, and I found a couple typos in there, or things that need to change, but originally, you only had 6 months to file a final plat, so if you had preliminary plan approval, you had 6 months to turn.
It's under
But that's
major
not-
subdivision?
Yeah, they need more time.
Yes. Yeah, it's D, right above 2.5. Carolina, it's still in 2.5.
Page
okay.
7.
Yeah.
So we
So
upped
we-
it to 12
We upped
months.
it to 12 months with
Oh.
an extension possibility, because that's not a lot of time when you have to go out designing
A
roads.
lot of major stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
And seasons. You know,
Yeah,
you
here,
can be caught
yeah.
out by the seasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I talked to Brian about that, and he felt comfortable with that as well. Thought that was reasonable.
So is that new also?
Yeah. Oh,
It's
the last
not a new section, but
it's a
the
new change.
time.
period has changed.
Was it less before?
Yeah,
Yes.
6 months.
Oh, right, okay. So this really gives people, makes it more reasonable.
Yep.
Okay.
Section 2.7, I made some changes here. I think originally we had it broken out in preliminary and final, and then I said, now let's just do one table. But after conversations with Brian, I decided, well, maybe we do need to be more clear what we need at preliminary and what we need at final. And so you'll see that the preliminary column is a lot, you can have it drawn rather than a survey. You can, for the location of the natural and cultural features, that we're going to base it on our GIS system and site visit observations, but then they really have to be delineated when it comes to the final. You need descriptions. You don't need the complete road profiles. And this seems,
Are people going to understand what that delineated means, like surveyed?
we can do survey.
And then also the blank spots, I mean, I guess a reasonable person would presume that you don't need that if
At
there's a
that
blank
stage.
spot, but it might at least be worth putting an X there or something.
Those jumped out at me too, I was gonna say shading. but-
Or shading, or a big X
Or
through the box or something.
not applicable.
Or not needed.
NA.
Yeah, NA,
Okay.
because an X gets mixed up with the checks.
Yeah. Just something so that it most clearly says not needed right now. You know. But I really like this. It's like
I like it
it's
too.
very simple, and it like starts from the beginning and goes down every single thing that you need, and it's very easy to understand, like applicable to new builders, not just experienced ones.
This will be helpful for the DRB too, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's consistent, like I think about the Brunel project.
Yeah.
It's kind of consistent with the information that he provided at the time, and I think that was reasonable. He couldn't quite do all the road profile stuff because he was still working out stormwater. So,
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable.
Yeah, it gives them a clearer expectation of what we're looking for, especially with the preliminary stuff. Like, hey, you don't need to have everything ready by the time you come in. You can have.
Yeah.
some
Now, one
preliminary
thing
stuff.
I would say, just so that you're aware of it, a lot of times with minor subdivisions, people don't necessarily come in with a survey at the time of hearing. So if it's maybe creating that.
Handwritten map or something.
Yeah, if it's one or two lots that they're
I
creating.
was going to say you could be dividing one lot into 3, and we probably wouldn't flip about having the survey done prior to the application.
Especially when it's not a question. They have the lot size and they've got the frontage. So that's kind of been practiced before the DRB. I'm of 2 minds. Well, I tend to think that if you're going to survey, if you're going to subdivide and there's no issues, then just go do the survey. It makes the process quicker. But I could see that could be a situation where they request a waiver at the time of final because they don't want to go through the expense.
They might want to kind of testing the waters a bit first before they drop a lot of money into it.
People say that a lot, but it's like, to me, it's different for us because we sit in the office and that's what we see.
Yeah.
But I'm like, you should be able to tell from the regulations as to whether you're going to get it or not. I mean, if you meet the minimum requirements and there's no real question, it's like there's not a whole lot that the DRB can hold you up with. It's just like it's kind of a gimme. And your classic, I've got 30 acres and I want to divide it into 3 parcels, and I've got road frontage on 2 sides. It's like, yeah, okay. How much do you want to talk about this? It's like, okay.
What would a survey cost in that situation if you were required?
It's hard to say. There's the terrain. If it
Ballpark, though. I mean, if you were budgeting your own project, how much would you budget for?
I don't know, actually. I really don't know. It's not in.
Look at back.
I've been cross-examining people. I'll have to
That's how surveyors work.
I've been talking to all these witnesses. I'm like, not answering them. I'm taking a bit. I have to talk to my advisors.
I mean, is this the kind of thing that's more than $5,000?
I was going to say it'll be like,
No, it
I'd
would
be
be
surprised
less.
if it was $5,000. It's
I would say like
3 to 5.
And what if you've got, say, a half-acre lot in town, and you're just getting your boundaries squared away?
Much less.
Yeah.
1,000 maybe?
Depends, like if you have a recent survey.
If you have
from
to.
when you bought the house or the property, or if it's on file with the
If
town.
they're-
The
This
weird
could
thing
be
about
up
in
to
town is
$1,000.
how bad the kind of history of the parcel is. So
You have to call in the fence viewer.
yeah, you have to go for the fence viewer.
No, our fence viewer's pretty nice, though.
He's a pretty decent fence viewer. So, but you can get in that situation where by the time you've read everybody else's deed, it's become less clear. Say you're missing 2 monuments, right? And it's Green Street. And then then you have to do the history, the history class in the town clerk's office, actually trying to figure out what it is. That can be time consuming, and at some point, you're going to have to pay for that.
So, with the minor one, though, you were saying about this, the DRB not necessarily taking a survey. Do you see that presenting any problems?
No. I mean, I don't think it has, because it tends to be, it's been lot line adjustments, which won't come before the DRB anyway. After, if these get passed. It's been lot line adjustments or, 1 or 2 lots.
I think.
I think it could be waived at that time, and usually
They've got to file
because the
a
Mylar
Mylar.
needs to be filed, and so
Yeah.
the chair is going to have to sign off on it. So the ZA and the chair check it.
The expense and kind of ceremonial aspect of filing the Mylar is a big enough check on everybody that. I don't think it's 100% guarantee it's going to be always correct, but there's a lot of effort that goes into making sure that it is correct.
I like that concept of ceremonial Mylar. Should at least be parchment.
Yeah, we should serve tea or something with it. Okay.
Okay, so we're squared away on the survey issue, everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
I have a question about 2.8A. It seems like flood hazard is so important that why would we just have it for majors and not minor?
This is actually a requirement of the National Flood Insurance Program that they have to give the base flood elevation if it's more than 50 lots or 5 acres.
Because wouldn't there be many instances around here where there's been flooding and there might be subdivision of 1 or 2 lots? And
No, you said we just have it for major. Where are you referring to something up in the table that maybe I missed?
No,
Well,
I'm
that's
looking
You're
at
just thinking.
50
the
lots
language
or
of
5 acres.
2.8A. The DRB shall require all subdivisions and
Well-
developments involving more than 50 lots or 5 acres.
Whichever is the lesser.
It's really confusing.
That's still a pretty big piece of land.
Yeah, so I'm.
If you're talking
you know,
about the lots
Yeah.
along the whetstone that were in our proposed overlay.
We
very
do
few of them.
require, you would need to map the the special flood hazard area, that would be on the survey, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But you wouldn't need to provide the base flood elevation. However, if you went to build, you would need to, and you were building in the special flood hazard area, you would need to provide the base flood elevation.
So that means I'm confused. Probably more confused than
I think what the
Okay.
NFIP is saying is that they want the base flood elevation on the subdivision plan in
Yes.
these situations.
Yes.
Any other time, we're going to get the base flood elevation based on coming in for a zoning permit to actually construct the house.
So there's
to
two.
make sure that-
So yeah, and what I'd say, somewhat in defense of this language, which sounds confusing, is that if I was going to subdivide, say, 15 acres along the whetstone into 3 parcels, each 5 acres, and each one of those parcels had about an acre in the A zone, I could be subdividing for the purposes, and then somebody could buy 5 acres and want to establish a greenhouse, which straight away is an agricultural use, which means that while it's useful to see on the subdivision the base flood elevation for that portion that's in the A zone, the new owner is not actually proposing a residential use, and they're actually proposing a use that is exempted from NFIP requirements because it's an agricultural structure-ish.
It's exempted by the state.
State.
I don't believe
Yes,
the fed's
it is.
exempted.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a
exempted by
gray
the state.
area.
It is a grey area. So it's exempted by the state. So then they wouldn't be obligated to necessarily provide us. Well, they'd have to demonstrate that it's not going to be a residential use, or so. In other words, you could be in a situation where the use that the parcel is put to is somehow exempt from requirements that we would normally impose.
So it'll only trigger for the
That
bait.
doesn't clarify
Doesn't
anything for me.
doesn't make it
So
feel any better.
So if it's less than the 5 acre, the standard that's set here,
Yep.
it would only trigger the need for this base flood elevation data if they wanted to somehow build a residential structure
No,
in
what,
the flood
what I'm really
zone.
trying to get at, let me try and simplify. Let me come at it a
It would,
different way.
it would do this. It would be part of this chart
Right.
under location of natural and cultural
Right.
facilities. It would be floodplains.
Right, exactly. And so what we're trying to get at is for people to identify natural features, including floodplains, and go through the process of subdivision. If it's an undeveloped parcel and then somebody subsequently wants to develop it with a residential use, then we would impose requirements that are contained in the zoning ordinance, where they would have to demonstrate that the structure was going to be the first
1 foot above.
the first floor is going to be 1 foot above base flood elevation or something like that, right? So there will be added requirements at the point of issuing a zoning permit. This is subdivision regulations, and it's, you know, it's a kind of an open question as to what the final use of that parcel is going to be. We want some information for the purposes of subdivision, but it's not the same level of information that we require for a zoning permit.
This is, I mean, I think it's,
You don't like this still?
I see it, and maybe it's good to clarify it with the state, but I see this as, okay, you filed your Mylar. We want on that Mylar, we want information about the base flood
Yeah.
elevation on the Mylar,
That's
so
it.
everybody knows it's there.
Yeah.
Well, I
5
would
years
just-
later, I buy a lot, I want to build a house, and I'm going to build it in the special flood hazard area. I'm going to have to meet other requirements
Yeah.
in the National
That-
Flood
yes.
Insurance Program and our zoning regulations.
Right.
Well, I just want to make sure that this section about identifying floodplains is sufficient so that the buyer of the other lots knows that they're buying floodplain encumbered land.
So I think,
That point's the better one.
I think that what we need to do, because I footnoted that section and said that it only applied to the subdivisions happening in the rural and the rural residential. I think we actually need to pull out the floodplain location and make that applicable to your
Yep.
subdivision
Everybody.
regardless
Okay.
of zoning district. So I
I'd
Pull
be
out the
better.
footnote?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. That was good.
It's worth noting is that the seller has a disclosure requirement there, and the buyer should have an attorney that can figure that out. Not that it always happens,
I
but
was just going to say.
Yeah.
Let's not rely on that process. Let's rely on this process.
I'm just saying, if a seller weren't to to tell the potential buyer that they'd be committing fraud.
Indeed, they will.
And of course,
It's a special section called buying a pig in a poke.
So if your house was flooded by Irene and you were selling it later, years later, say, you'd have to disclose on your disclosure that, like,
If you
Not
rent-
that. You'd
Not
have
that.
to disclose that it was in the
Special-
flood hazard area.
If it's in the special flood hazard area, you have to disclose that.
Or
Yeah.
But
it
if
was
it's
damaged.
outside and it was flooded?
No,
I don't know. I mean, there's a
because you
famous
really want to
case
sell
where
your house
someone-
and you don't want to,
There's a famous case where someone was testing their well for gasoline and didn't tell the buyer. And they said that was fraud, even though the buyer said it didn't matter. It wouldn't have changed their decision. So I think it's probably a gray area. If I were advising the seller, I'd say you should probably say that your house got flooded. But that's just me.
Now everybody knows which lawyer to hire. They're selling flood property.
Buyers.
Buyers. Yes.
Sellers to avoid it.
So that's the new information in Article 2 that I wanted to go over from the last time that you saw it. Everything else might be reformatted, but has not changed.
So we all comfortable with Article 2?
There was. I'm sorry. I don't know if it was in section 2 or not, but it was the one about if the town's going to take over the roads, they have to be paved. They have to have ditches.
Yes,
Where's that?
Yeah.
that's Article 3.
That's 3.
So you're right in the right spot.
Okay.
3.3,
Yeah.
I think.
it's under roadways.
3.3B, I think.
If you have anything to say about 3, I'll let you go ahead and say that before I say anything.
Well, no, I added some driveway standards in G. And then sorry, that would be on page 14. So I added driveway standards. And there's a little section in 3.4, but I can talk to that afterwards, if you want to talk about roads.
Yeah, it wasn't. Oh wait. So the public roads have to be paved. Even if it's out in the middle of nowhere, and they're
Yes.
doing a subdivision.
Public Works expressed to us that they wanted roads to have a minimum, traveled way of 18 feet and to be paved if to be considered, to be taken up by the town.
And that would begin once you have 3 lots sharing a common drive.
Nope,
No?
not necessarily. A driveway is, you can have 1 or 2 homes off a driveway. Once you have a 3rd house, it becomes a private road.
And that can be gravel.
You could, a
Yeah.
private
Yes.
road can be gravel, it can be narrower. We're recommending the state standards, so you could, have a 14-foot travel way. I think under the state standards, it depends on the level of traffic. What Public Works told us is if it's going to be a public road, they want it paved and they want it at least an 18-foot travel way.
See, because, and maybe I'm wrong on this, like, let's say there's a parcel way out off of, like, Ames Hill, and someone wants to do a 4 or 5 year plot thing with a road, and the developer's intent is to have that road be a public road off of, say, a main road. I'm worried about if we're paving that road in the middle of nowhere where all the other roads are not paved, that we're adding to stormwater runoff, which we don't want to do, and where there's not adequate ability to handle the stormwater runoff, and we're harming the rural character of the area.
All good points.
What if we had a waiver if the road connects to a gravel road for the DRB?
I think the issue here is that the DRB is not in a position to take up public roads anyway. All they can do is say, here's the requirements, and then it's the select board's role probably based on
Yeah,
recommendations.
you have a section saying that, all that.
Yeah,
Good.
and it's going to be based on, I would think, heavily recommendations of the Public Works. I think what
Yeah.
they've found in the past is that it's in the developer's interest to probably make it gravel. Well, maybe not in their interest, but a lot of times they'll build it gravel, and they will, maybe make it narrow. But at some point in the history, maybe new property owners come in and they want it taken over by the town. And there's, in the past, the town has gone in and paved. I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you, but that's the position that they're coming from. They don't want their. They don't
Well,
want
it's
to
a
be in
lot.
position
It's a lot
have to
cheaper
pave.
to maintain a paved
I mean,
road over
you
time.
could argue the flip side that, okay, those 5 homeowners want to come in and have a public road, then they need to upgrade the road and make it paved and make it meet the town standards.
Yeah.
I think what I was trying to do was convey where they were at.
Where are we exactly?
12B2. Public road must have a minimum paved travel way of 18 feet. I think Dave is right, and as much as I appreciate the conundrum that this presents Public Works, it's our job to write the laws in accordance with the town plan. And the town plan is very specific about the importance of keeping a rural character. And when I imagine a development with a big paved loop like Highline or whatever it is off Ames Hill, I think that would not be true to the town plan if we force them to have a big old paved road coming right next to Robb Farm.
So could it be gravel?
Well, I was just thinking if we give the DRB the power to waive it,
Right.
I mean, theoretically the town has the power to say we ain't going to take it up.
Yeah.
I think, that's what is interesting here, having worked with other communities where they're just really adamant that they're not taking stuff up. It's like, you wanted a private road, you got a private road, knock yourselves out.
I've seen it.
Right. It's like, keep it up, that's great. See you later.
I've even seen that in very urban areas. They're
Yes.
like, no, this is a private street and you maintain it and you
Right.
do all that. And the town is not going to bear that burden.
And so Brattleboro, for whatever reason, I think is, I'm sure it's not the only town in Vermont where the politics has gone this way, but, Public Works could rattle off several instances where what initially started out as a gravel road and was of, maybe not perfect quality, then, as it became more built out, new residents petitioned the town, and let me say it's important here that the original developer, the person who proposed, who did the subdivision in the first place, was perfectly relaxed about it being a gravel road and going, have a nice rural lot on a gravel road.
Right.
I'll sell you that. See you later. Right? We're all good, right? And then subsequent to that, new people join the neighborhood with different expectations and then petition the town to take the road up. And then as part of that process, they massively upgrade the road so that it meets town standards. And so effectively, all taxpayers subsidize the improvement of a private road. And that's what Public Works wants to avoid by saying, if you're going to build a road, build it to town standards. So because they're assuming that sooner or later there will be this request to turn it into a town road, and they don't want to then deal with that difficult engineering and as well as financial problem of upgrading the road.
I do understand that, and especially
say no.
especially
I encourage them to say no.
especially with the width thing.
Right,
Like that is especially important.
That's like a structural
That's
issue.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's dealing with emergency access and all that. I just have a really hard. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's having an overbearing mother or something, but I immediately go to worst case scenario. I just see a bunch of little subdivisions all over off of rural dirt roads with
You
a
can-
Like
bunch
the
of
way you
little
think
paved
that-
roads.
You can do Google Earth and you can find this anomalous outcome already in Brattleboro where there's been a subdivision where the road on the subdivision is sealed and it joins a dirt road.
Yeah.
So it's a couple of things that actually flow from that, none the least of which is over time as vehicles move from the dirt to the sealed road, they bring some
Yes.
amount of material with them from the dirt road. So it pretty much doesn't, anyway.
Yeah.
So, and there is this sort of really anomalous thing of like you back out, you're on sealed road, and then literally 200 feet later you go down to dirt, and then continue on dirt for a mile, and then rejoin a sealed road. It's sort of, it's peculiar.
Yeah.
Yes.
And contrary to our rural character thing, I think in a really significant way.
Well, does anybody disagree with David? I agree with him.
I agree
You guys
with
agree
that.
with him?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody agrees with him. Do you think a DRB waiver is the appropriate?
No, I think we should take out the page. I think we should maybe be silent on it.
Okay.
And that way it,
Mm-hmm.
because most developers are going to make it clear probably about what their intention is, whether it's to be public or private. I think if the DRB sticks with the 50-foot right-of-way, then you will have room to make improvements if it needs to be upgraded.
In
In the
or to be
future.
taken over in the future.
Yeah.
But I'd
that
rather
meant-
the DRB
yeah.
not be waiving that because it's not
This-
really their authority.
Yeah.
So what are we going to take out?
We're going to take out the word
Just take the word
paved
paved.
in line
Do we wanna
1, 2,
leave the
3,
18
4,
feet,
5,
though?
6,
Yeah.
7.
Yes, I think we should, because if
All
it
right.
does
Right
be
here, I
taken
see.
over public, I mean, I don't know how much it costs to build a road, but I imagine it's far more expensive to build a road out than to just
More
replace
than
what you
having
have
a
with
survey.
pavement. So,
Okay, problem solved.
awesome.
Yep. All right, so that's good. Thank you. And then I think, what I'd say is,
So just a minimum travel way.
at the risk of beating a dead horse, if it's a properly designed gravel road
Yeah.
and you've got a 50-foot right of way and
So
an
does that
18-foot
change the-
wide travel way,
The
so
end statements.
you've got 50
So
feet,
it's
and then
maybe
plonked in the
good
middle of
idea, or
it,
is
you've
that
got
okay
18
to have
feet that
that
you've
there?
maintained with gravel and ditching and all that kind of stuff. And when you take into account the ditching, you're probably looking at another 6 to 10 feet. So it's 18 plus 10, 28,
Yeah.
right? So
I
if you
don't
want to do the
understand
upgrade
that.
from gravel to seal it at some point, you've got all the space that you need, and if it's done, if
Yeah.
it's designed properly with gentle grades and turns and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
it's not that impossibly difficult to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
But,
yeah, and that's what I was trying to get at is
Right.
like maybe we can create the environment where in the future it can be easily and cost effectively upgraded, but we're still, at least for the time being, trying to
Maintain a rural.
maintain the rural
Yeah.
character.
How is it that you're Brattleboro's planning director and we don't measure our width in rods?
Well, I
yard
prefer furlongs myself, but yeah, don't go there. Or perches. How about a perch, which is not a fish? So no, I don't know. We should make a rule.
Sorry.
all
Anyway,
right.
so let's continue through section 3.
That's good. Does anybody else have anything on roads?
Well, just in the rest of that sentence, does it then matter that it says private roads, blah, 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 may be gravel or paved? Is that still okay to have that there?
I like to limit anybody.
Yeah, that doesn't.
It doesn't matter that we eliminated paved earlier?
Yeah,
It's not requiring them
Because
to do anything.
Yeah,
isn't it
it's just-
private roads?
Because they can make it however
Is
they
there?
want.
Yeah, I mean they're maintaining it, but
we've got examples of paved private roads in town,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Putney Road and stuff.
But she does bring up a good point though, is that if we've eliminated the paved in the other part, what if we have someone wanting to come in and do an 8-unit subdivision with a private road and they want to pave it, and then
Maybe, though.
then we've detrimentally affected the rural character again, even though it's private.
Well, I think the 8 houses would change the rural character just
Yeah.
as much as the paved
Yeah,
road.
Yeah.
but I don't know. I just have a really
But the alternative, yeah, I mean,
hard time with adding pavement in the middle of
yeah, I
nowhere.
think adding pavement is kind of, in general not a great idea.
Well, I think paved road is one of the most important things of the 19th century, so.
Yeah, that's kind of exaggerated, really.
Indoor plumbing might be more important.
I would
lived in
rank
the-
indoor plumbing as a bigger innovation myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
If you live in the town of Marlboro, every road is gravel anyways, except for South Road.
My home road.
It's the only one. 5 miles of pavement and that's it.
Yes.
And they
And
keep
they've
it
got a
that
rule
way.
about that.
They
They're not
do.
changing it.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
I think there's a similar point of view in our neighborhood too. I think there'd be
Putney or Westminster?
What do you
both.
think?
I think there'd be an effort to reduce it to a bike track.
Yeah.
Are you thinking of adding something here, David, that would say a private road coming off a gravel road, say in a rural area, in a rural zoning district? would
That
have
gets
to
too
be private?
complicated.
No, I wouldn't even say
I think
that.
Sue's thing of just letting
I
it
just-
be.
We
I
could
just have
get
a
rid of the
really-
gravel or paved. We could just say private roads may have a narrow driveway.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
we should
That's the
do
part I
that.
was, yeah.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, like Brad said, I mean, there's a lot of private roads in town that
Right.
are in
Yeah.
industrial zoning districts
Yeah.
that are off Putney Road.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, that was sort of my question. If you're taking the paved
mean,
away in one
yeah.
place, it doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that we would, well, I don't know, would it
In
make
the-
much sense to have a gravel private road off of Putney Road?
I'm.
I mean, so I think
Yeah.
that
Well, there
these
is
are going
one
to be
going to
discussions
that
with
little-
DRB.
I mean, I think it's good
Behind
because
the Friendlies there?
it at least forces even though it makes it a little bit more ambiguous, it at least forces the discussion of it with regard to what our desires are with the town plan.
Yeah, I'd like to have the DRB be able to have the discussion as to whether they think whatever the developer's proposing is appropriate for the character of the
Okay.
area or not.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, so in the instance of I want to have a gravel road off Putney Road, they'd be like, and then if I want to have a paved road off
Ames Hill.
Ames Hill, they'll be like, you know, so it should be that you've got the ability to go,
Well, that doesn't make the most.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
All right.
All these
Let's see
complicated
what
issues here.
problems we have
It's all right.
as we
Good.
move forward. What's the next thing?
We're
So-
paving the way to the future.
Yes. In section 3.4 on number 15. So there's been a couple of, well,
I'm sorry.
there's been a weird situation. So with the water and the wastewater,
Water, wastewater. Here, going to the next page.
Thank you.
that's permitted by the state. However, it's still the DRB's requirement to make sure that there's adequate water and wastewater. So if we're not going to require, we had this conversation before, we're not going to require test pits and all that. Basically, we're saying we're going to let the state permitting prove that this lot, you know, can have water or septic
And
system.
accommodate wastewater.
And so it's really important that a plat not be signed off until they've provided evidence of that. There's been some
Yeah, that's your
situation
last
right now
statement
that's
there on the
so
page.
so I added that statement basically saying that if the DRB is going to cede that over to the state, which is okay,
Yeah.
then we actually need to see the permits before the subdivision is filed.
And I like that that's in writing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Because I think that's slipped through a couple times and then it can kind of create weird.
Yeah.
Uncomfortable.
We all satisfied with that?
Yeah, yeah, that's good.
Great.
There's been no other changes.
I have a question about 3.6 municipal impact. I really liked this first statement, but I don't know, like,
one sentence.
how does it get
Implemented?
implemented?
I imagine, wouldn't you just have a person from a municipality come to the DRB meeting and say, hey, this is going to affect my department in this way?
So we do send around the applications. They are reviewed by police, fire, and public works.
School
So
board.
it should be like
School board, we
subject
don't send it
to
to. Act 250
X,
does.
Y, and Z. You know, like there needs to be something accompanying this statement that shows how it's going to be determined.
Also, if there is something that might create a burden on a service, such as housing development, that suddenly there's going to be 50 kids and it's going to overfill Academy School.
There's no neighborhood schools. So it'll
Well,
be distributed.
It'll be,
Yeah,
yeah.
just kidding.
You know,
This one's good.
are there a means? Is there a means for the? I mean, I don't know how this works. I've heard this happening in the past with huge developments in other places, but where a developer would offer to assist the municipality in upgrading their infrastructure to
Well, sometimes there'd be
Impact fees.
impact statement,
Impact
and then there'd be
fees, yeah.
impact fees
Yeah.
according to that statement.
Yeah.
But I just think this is a good statement, but it needs to be backed up by saying that this impact shall be determined by somebody,
Yeah.
you know, and have the, how is it going to be
Right.
implemented or regulated?
Well, okay, so let's think through.
Or how do you show that?
Right. Let's think through who would
I guess
be
that's
in line. So
implementation.
we could do it as part of the staff review. You know, we could ask. We could check in with fire, DPW, and police, and establish whether there is going to be an impact or a burden.
I could do a fiscal impact analysis.
Well, there could be. I mean, and, you know, in the
Yeah.
case of a huge subdivision that
Right.
comes in, it could be completely
Under a
reasonable
major
for the
one,
DRB.
yeah.
Right. Well,
Right.
the other part about this though is that if it is more than 10 parcels or more than 10 units or 10 acres of disturbance, it's off to Act 250, and there are impact assessments as part of the Act 250 process.
Okay.
We would comment to say whether there's an impact on municipal services. And the school, if the school gets the application and they get to comment on whether it's going to impact them or not.
That's through Act 250, though.
Through Act 250. So what I'm trying to get at here is, if we're under that threshold, if it's 9 parcels or 9 acres, we're making an assumption that
It's probably not going to.
that's probably not going to have that big of an impact, right? Now,
But there might be some sort of public works element that's a problem. And I'm
Could
just
be,
saying
yeah.
that this
Yes, it
just
could be.
needs
Yeah.
a mechanism
right.
for having somebody identify that impact and making a determination under
Well, I
this heading.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I do.
What do you
I'm torn
imagine
between. I definitely, you know, I think that if DPW feels strongly that some aspect is going to be an issue for them, then they need to put it in writing. And if they feel really strongly, they've been instructed that they should be before the DRB. Ultimately, it is still the DRB's decision whether or not how they're going to
Yeah.
weigh what they
Right.
have in front of them.
But the DRB, if they're gonna follow these regulations, need some sort of a mechanism for making this determination to
Yeah,
help
if I'm a-
them make their decision.
So basically,
I'm not envisioning anything, James. I'm just saying, based on these words, there needs to be more words
like
How is it
to
made
make it
different?
like as
implemented.
determined by
as determined by.
DPW.
Yeah, because there's no meat
BPD.
behind it. It's a
Yeah.
nice statement. It's like stating something, but it's like, so what?
Wait, is it something like comments received from Public Works?
Yeah, this shall be
Yeah.
based on an evaluation of the-
Because they could come in and say, like, you know, it's not saying, well, who's making this determination that
Right.
it doesn't affect
Yeah.
the
Like the applicant
stuff.
could
Yeah.
make a self-serving statement,
Statement.
but what that good is that? Someone needs to make that determination.
We could just have a box for them on the form and say,
Yeah.
self-serving statement here.
Well, it's like you're telling me that my development's going to be a burden, and I want you to tell me how and why and how you
Yeah.
can justify that. Otherwise, I want my permit, you know?
This needs, some sort of a hook.
I
Not a
just think
lot,
what
but-
you're thinking is going to be hard to do because
Yeah.
the range of services provided by the municipality is so broad.
But aren't,
Yes, but if you mean it, if you're going to say it, then do something about it. Don't just say it.
well, aren't those some things that included in some of the other things we're talking about here?
Not necessarily.
No? Like
No, I mean,
turnarounds for fire trucks, and
This
isn't that spelled out
this is
somewhere?
specific to the development burdening infrastructure or other services that are not provided in the general area, not the natural and cultural attributes of the parcel that's going to be developed. So that would be the distinction I'd want to draw. So
So imagine there's a big development that comes in and the stormwater system's really complicated and the town usually takes over the stormwater, cleaning it. And they're like, absolutely not. This is going to burden us. We're going to have to hire,
Yeah.
2 new people and some new equipment in order to do this with our other stuff.
right. It could be
Would that
stormwater,
be
actually, you're
not
right.
enough for you?
No, I'm just saying that this sentence requires another sentence that provides some sort of a mechanism for municipal control, so that it's going to
Or do you mean control or review? Review.
review
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
and
Not
a
control.
determination, so that determination can be given to the DRB and the DRB can act on it.
Right. Right.
It's the who statement. Who's going to determine that it's not creating? Because this,
That's
the
right.
way it is right now, it's vague enough that the applicant themselves could attest to it not having a municipal impact.
Sure, but the thing is, I don't think anybody but the DRB can say whether it does or doesn't in the end.
Right.
But
Yeah, but the DRB needs
we need that
guidance as to
statement
what
from
what that
the
is.
DPW.
So I guess what if I hear Liz correctly, what she's saying is that the process of review that staff undertake for the subdivision application needs to address municipal impact and make statements that the DRB can then turn into findings and say, the DRB finds there will be no undue municipal impact or undue
Yeah,
burden,
like,
or
I
the DRB
seem
finds that
to
there is going to
remember-
be one and it's going to be addressed this way.
But there was a case where municipal officials came to the DRB hearing and said, this is going to be a problem, and the DRB said, approved it anyway. I don't have anything more specific, but I just remember
But I'm saying we
that
can't prevent
occurrence.
that from happening legally.
Well, yes, you can.
You can
if
make
you
a
s- if you
negative
take
finding.
You can make a
this
negative finding.
if you take this
DRB
statement
could.
right
Yes.
here.
Yes.
But we can't write an ordinance that says that the DRB has to find something.
No, but what we can do is outline a mechanism that would deliver the information to the DRB to consider in making
That's
a
right.
finding.
That's
And
Don't
then
you
if
want
the
more
D-
than that, though?
Well, I would think that the DRB would take this statement and do something about it.
Well, I think there's a misunderstanding happening, and I think basically, you know how like once in a while,
I'm not saying I understand. That's why I'm
yeah,
asking
yeah,
so many
we'll
questions.
get like the little statement from the fire chief, and that says, oh, this isn't gonna those, and we need to have those. And the way it's written now is it doesn't say who's going to provide those.
See, I think you may be misunderstanding her because I don't think that quite is what you. I don't think that's quite enough. To
Well,
satisfy
that'd
you.
work.
Yeah.
My comment came from my philosophical background in the reading of this statement. And the statement just begged the question that there needed to be a mechanism to regulate the statement. I mean, the statement is all very nice, but it has no force or effect unless you added more to it
jam golf.
to guide the DRB.
Yes,
So
I know,
there
but-
needs to be some sort of a statement that says, maybe there needs to be a form that all of the agencies in the municipality that are reviewing this application can sign off or not sign off and give that to the DRB.
So what would happen if they didn't sign up?
Maybe they could, I don't know. Maybe they could sign off on it anyway, going over the heads of the fire chief or whomever. But then they could be subject to a lawsuit.
It-
Sorry.
I mean, ultimately, it is the DRB's decision, and
Yeah.
departments can ask for certain things, and maybe they'll get them, maybe they won't.
But this is a means, I mean, I like the statement. It's a means by which the DRB can take into account the cost and the impact that each application is going to create for the town.
And to sort of be a little bit more explicit about it, I would say, I'm making a bit of an assumption here, a bit of a guess, but I would say if this was to come up in the near future, it'll most likely be around stormwater impact. So the example that Sue gave before, we've come close to that one before. There was a proposal for a subdivision, a large-scale subdivision in a PUD that included steep slopes. And the provisional design, the conceptual design showed, a series of switchbacks to, deal with the slope. And then a series of catch basins and it was clear that the developers were expecting that the town would take up the road. And informally, a senior public works, staff person looked at it and went, "Oh, we'd have to hire another guy." That was his reaction. He just looked at it and went, "Oh, we're kind of flat out right now. That many catch basins to clean, that'd trigger us hiring another guy."
I'm all for getting reports from whoever is affected, and I like that happens now, and I don't think you could really enforce this without getting expert testimony from whomever's in the department affected. But where I disagree with you, if I understand you, which I'm not saying I do, is if someone's sitting on the DRB and they get a note that says, well, the fire chief says this is going to adversely impact fire rescue, and he's not there, and there's no further explanation, I mean, I wouldn't feel comfortable just saying, well, you've got to deny an application in that situation no matter what. I mean, the DRB is the judge, and they should weigh the testimony or the evidence on the record. And I mean, it may be that...
maybe they could. I don't know. I'm just offering that up for us to consider. But I think that this statement here needs to be accompanied by another one that has some sort of force or impact. And I also think that this statement here, if the DRB approved it anyway over these objections, that somebody like the select board could sue the DRB for their decision if they didn't like
They
it.
can appeal the decision.
They can appeal the decision.
I'd hope they wouldn't.
I'm a
sue us.
litigious person,
No, it's okay.
but they could really have a problem with some decision that wasn't thought through in this regard.
But that's a good thing.
But James,
Well, let's not get to that point. Let's
Yeah.
do something here to prevent it.
I also think
Sure, but
there's a couple of reasons that I think that this is important. I mean, and I think, your case, sure, if the fire chief is not there or somebody from the fire department is not there for you to question them about what do they mean or can they do this or can they do that, the DRB can also put a condition of approval on
Or
it.
continue the hearing.
That's right.
I think,
They've done that before.
I
There's
think
tools
that-
they've got.
I'm just saying you might get someone who comes before you and you say to yourself, as a finder of fact, I'm not sure this guy's doing this because it's in the municipality's interest. He might just be doing it because he doesn't like skate parks, strip clubs, building a development near a graveyard his mother's buried in, whatever.
Right.
I mean, certainly people who subdivide land are not perfect and sometimes are, not entirely truthful because they want to make some money. But sometimes municipal officials and abutters also are imperfect.
Oh, yeah, I'm not, I think what we're trying to do here is outline a process of assessment or review where, the board would have before them, in an ideal application, the board would have before them some response provided by staff and based on the requisite experts.
I totally agree with that. I mean, it's very helpful when we have that.
And if it wasn't, if there was a flaw in that process, then the DRB's got some decisions it can make procedurally. It can continue the hearing if it's contentious. Say you've got a situation where, a town official makes, very strong claim about the impact, which doesn't seem to be very well supported in fact, but and the room is divided, right? There's a lot of public here. Some of them are supporting the staff member from the town. Some of them are, supporting the developer or whatever. Then the DRB can continue and call for more information, or it can make a finding, up or down, and then live by the consequences, or it can waive the requirement, right? So, between the procedural mechanisms that the DRB has at its disposal and the idea of, the applicant being expected to furnish enough information so that staff can do a serious review, I actually think there are things that could come out here that would be useful and make for stronger decisions. And I think that like I said, I think given particularly what we're trying to get at with rural and rural residential, if there's an expectation that the town is going to take up a road or something subsequently, or I think that stormwater is the most likely candidate for this in some ways.
Okay.
So, I think we can explain a mechanism that is not very different from what we do now.
And doesn't.
It's not
Tie
overly
anybody's hands
burdensome,
either.
but it
Right.
this just needs another sentence.
Right.
See, I
That's all
sort
I'm
of
saying.
thought you wanted like a test.
Pardon me?
Like a test. The DRB shall find something unduly burdensome if, colon,
No.
No.
No, I think it can be up to the municipal review process and also the DRB.
Right.
A process that's already in place, but you just want it clarified.
Yeah,
Right.
It's really
Right.
just
Yeah.
that
And
simple.
I'm sorry, it's just hard to understand when we get into the weeds
I
sometimes.
understand. That's fine with me. It's just when I read it, I thought, well, that's very nice, but how are you going to do that?
Right.
So
Right.
I got more of those.
Okay.
We were going to just review
If you got a
the
lot
cumulative
more,
content of the self-serving statement.
let's get to the next ones then, because we should address them all.
Okay.
How about C? 3.7C, where it
Geez, same
says,
page, please.
well, you got me at the where feasible.
We talked about this last time, didn't we?
That was somewhere else. Is everybody okay with this where feasible, or do we have to?
I would prefer the applicant show almost like I would prefer a waiver requirement. So this should be the default, and then the applicant would have to show why this default approach wasn't going to work. It could be, hey, it's Putney Road, dummy. I'm going to plug into your existing system.
Right. It's bedrock. I can't build a rain garden here.
It's already not very
So
nice.
it's the same kind of remedy as what
Right.
you added from the last time,
Right.
that should be a statement proving
Well-
why or why not.
Well, I
it
should
won't
probably
work.
just ditch the where feasible then, and then make it be a
Right.
waiver.
Right.
Okay.
Let's do that.
Yep.
Okay.
Everybody agree?
Mhm.
Boom. Liz. Next page.
So after
Fine.
all development, just period?
Yep.
4.1,
Oh,
where it says urban, I prefer it say dense.
What about thickly settled?
That's too weird
So,
for
It
me.
is weird. I thought that was
It's my favorite.
Yeah, I want to take one of those roadsides.
Anybody
someday.
have any beef with the word dense?
It's kind of sizes.
I don't know how necessary it is to change that.
Yeah.
It's giving an example. I guess I don't entirely understand your reasoning for
Yeah, I don't either.
changing it.
Can
I think
speak-
some people in Brattleboro would object to the term urban being used in there.
Oh, we have an urban center. They need to get over that.
Parentheses, get over it.
But
She's become
but it's
too
using
ruralized
it's using
here.
an example though, because what it's saying
Drinking
is
the
we
Kool-Aid.
we have neighborhood parks such as that little thing off of what is it? Washington. There's a little town park over there, or you have something like Pliny Park, which is Pliny Plaza.
Right.
So it's
Right.
just giving examples. I don't know if there's necessarily any. I mean, we can change it. I'm not that particularly attached to it, but I just don't see why.
We can vote on it, or you two can have a friendly agreement.
Why don't we
We could
just...
do
I don't care.
we could call it T&D development homes. Traditional neighborhood design. No, I can't do that.
No. It opens a whole different can of
Yes,
worms.
yeah.
So you want to change it from such as neighborhood parks to dense plazas?
No, just this.
No, the other
Up
one
top.
up here.
The urban development patterns instead of urban development dense.
Why don't we just say
that's
remove
what I was
urban and
confused
replace
about.
it with the word neighborhood?
I'm uncreating.
Neighborhood?
neighborhood.
I like neighborhood.
David, neighborhood? It's a beautiful.
I don't care.
Oh,
We
yeah,
can
that's
use dense now. I thought you were talking about the urban
the urban
plazas,
plaza.
but I was like,
no,
that
no.
doesn't make any sense. What's a dense plaza?
Well-
Now I see what you're saying.
Oh,
Go ahead, use dense.
definitely Plenty Park is pretty
Some of
dense.
us are dense.
So,
Liz, the ball's in your court.
Yeah,
Dense
neighborhood?
Yes. That sounds good.
I don't care.
If you're content with
Creating neighborhood development
Neighborhood.
patterns.
That's Carolina's preference.
I'm fine with neighborhood.
Okay.
Is that all right with you, sir?
Neighborhood.
Good.
Yeah,
One for,
that's a good
one
word.
for Mr. Rogers. That's excellent.
That's right.
Okay. Sue, do you have things in Article 4 you want to call our attention to
No.
before we start getting?
I made no changes to Article 4.
Okay, do people on the board have questions, edits, things of that nature with Article 4?
4.8.
Landscape.
How do you regulate the fact that you want existing trees shall be retained and incorporated to the extent possible? It's always
Hate those.
yeah,
Yeah.
these
Qualifiers.
terms. How are you going to do that?
Do you want to wait for that one, Joe?
That will work.
Well, if you talk to a tree person, there's specific ways to do that.
Yeah.
Very
Well,
specific ways.
Actually, this is the one piece of this section of the regulations that I think that could benefit from looking at the things that we've talked about and the methods that we've designed for the rural and rural residential. So if there's a parcel of land somewhere, inside the urban compact, or within the, between the Connecticut River and say 91, and it's got some, it's going to be subdivided off a different parcel. It's fairly large, so you could have multiple smaller parcels, or you could develop it fairly densely with townhouses or something, and that just happens to have some really straggly trees that are pretty crappy, that don't have any value, but actually what it has is a couple of really standout trees, specimen trees. Then wouldn't we want the developer to actually do something similar to what we expect them to do in other parts of town, which is identify these as specimen trees, and say that that their plan actually accommodates or responds to the existence of specimen trees, and that identifies the rest as scrubby crap, and that's going to go.
Why don't we add the word specimen here?
So
You don't like scrubby crap?
No, I'm fine with that too. But there's a definition of specimen trees somewhere, right?
yep, there is scrubby crap actually.
Can we put a footnote here that says what a specimen tree is, because I could see a layperson.
Right.
There's another aspect to this that's not spelled out here at all, in that sometimes the way you retain landscape and trees doesn't always show up. The impact doesn't always show up right away. It might not
Right.
show up for like 2 years because you've damaged
The roots.
Yes.
the root spread, and you won't notice that for maybe 2 years when the tree starts dying off from the top down, and that's really as a result of the construction process
Yes.
and what happened. And so there's no
Yeah.
nothing addressing
Isn't that
that.
usually a site plan thing?
And also, when they do landscaping, they could put in any kind of landscaping, and a year later it could all be dead. So again, some of that's sort of addressed when it's called sustainable and blah, 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 but those are two separate things.
I think
One
we-
about the damage that
still
happens that
do
doesn't
the
show up
same
right away.
extent.
At the site plan level, we have a provision for requiring bonds, which in this case, you're going to get landscaping, say, I don't know, there's a 4-lot subdivision off of
Yeah.
Putney Road, or some sort of office park is being developed, then you're going to get the landscaping on the subdivision level, but I think primarily it's going to be at the site plan level based on the type of development we've been having.
Yeah.
If you were getting an office park or something like that, or a big residential neighborhood that was going to have landscaping as part of the subdivision, that could be bonded
Yeah.
as well,
Okay.
based on some of the criteria in Article 2.
Should we make it explicit in here if that's what we want?
But I'm concerned about the damage especially to like specimen trees that
Yeah,
people
I'm
unwittingly.
I think if we somehow
Because
rework
that
that
is what I'm a little less
right.
sure of how to handle, but
Right.
Yeah.
I think.
How do you do
You
that?
can get there.
Well, I mean, yeah. So if we change out that last sentence, it might need us some time to rethink that last
Yeah.
sentence, where we're basically replacing the term existing trees with specimen trees. And I should state here that I don't have much of a problem with somebody cutting down a quite nice tree that doesn't have, substantial intrinsic value if it's in the way of what they want to do.
Yeah.
As long as the landscaping plan that they show takes seriously the idea that they're going to landscape, right? So in an urban setting. So I could imagine you being quite drastic in your removal of existing trees to achieve, a certain density level or to arrange the site in a particular way, but then actually you're going to bring in trees that, if all goes well, they'll end up specimen trees,
Yeah,
right?
well,
What are the
yeah, that's happening up
in the
here.
urban center? What are the? I don't have the information right in front of me, but what are the minimum and maximum lot coverage for a parcel?
In the urban center.
In the urban center,
There's none.
there's none. So you can do 100%.
They could do 100%. So by making this applicable to the urban center, aren't we, in essence, saying you should save these trees, but actually, no, you can build a building over 100% of the lot?
Well,
It is a good, yeah.
well, that wouldn't happen.
I'm just worried about, given,
When I think of
is
landscaping,
it necessary for this to be applicable to the urban zone? I mean, is it
well,
possible to have a major
in the urban
subdivision
center,
in the
you're
urban
pretty,
center?
I don't think that it would be possible to have that in the urban center. I could be wrong.
You mean 100% lot coverage?
No, a major subdivision where you then go
Yeah.
in and do.
Is
When I look at
Morningside?
this section,
Morningside's outside urban center.
Really?
yeah,
That's
They're
rural.
I mean, it's pretty close, though.
yeah, it's not urban.
Yeah, but there's a pretty significant barrier.
I think that your concern would be more at the site level.
Yeah.
When I think of landscaping with a subdivision, it's maybe street trees,
Yeah.
like when Brunel, I know that's a planned residential development, but
Yeah.
he's got landscaping going on. He's got street trees up the road.
Right.
I'm just
That's the kind of subdivision landscaping you're
And
gonna
so, yeah, and so...
get, maybe some landscaping around your stormwater management.
I'm just questioning. I mean, I guess this might be something separate on an
Yeah.
issue, and I'm sorry to interject into the other one, but I just don't know how practical it is then to have this apply to the urban center as it's listed in 4.2.
I guess my reaction is,
I mean,
just as an example, there is a hypothetical example. So there's a church that's in the urban center that the parish disappears, right, and it becomes abandoned and underutilized, and it happens to have in the churchyard a couple of really stunning specimen trees.
Yeah.
And then somebody comes along and says, actually, the church is kind of falling in on itself, and so I want to knock it down, and then I want to subdivide this yard into 3 parcels. At that moment, it would be good for the DRB to say, hang on a second, those 3 specimen trees, they're really important. So you're going to have to come up with a plan that accommodates the existence of those 3 specimen trees.
But then they can come back and say, well, the law does the standards say that I can build on 100% of the lot.
But it also says that you have to come up with a landscaping plan. And so because you've been asked to identify whether or not there are specimen trees, and you come back with an affirmative finding, yes, I have specimen trees, then you have to show how you're going to deal with the specimen trees. You take that, and then you take up something else, like a gas station, that is totally blacktop and has no specimen trees, and it's in the urban center, and you're like, yeah, knock yourself out. Do some nice landscaping as part of that subdivision. But yeah, there is no natural feature, there's no specimen trees there that we're asking you to...
I guess I'm just, and I'm sure it's probably next to none.
Right.
I am just worried about our desire to infill the urban area may be hindered by our simultaneous desire to retain natural resources.
Well, I would say about northern New England in particular, which is sort of interesting, of smaller towns, is that there's not a lot of urban forestry or urban tree cover that gets a lot of respect and recognition, partly because there's an abundance of trees in the background everywhere. And so I would think that the quality of life and the kind of quality of the setting could be enhanced if people paid more attention to keeping street trees or introducing more trees to the urban center. And certainly looking after the ones that we've got.
My concern is a developer being hindered in making an urban development because maybe there's a couple specimen trees going down like the dividing line between him and a building or something, and then or the specimen trees are at such a point that they can't possibly develop it.
But
Then you can have a waiver.
Yeah,
though.
then you-
I mean,
well-
I think in the urban center, like you could argue that you could make an argument it's consistent with the development pattern for the buildings to
Not have trees, not have any
You know,
landscaping.
take up the entire lot.
Yeah.
And you would request a waiver for
Yeah.
that because it wouldn't.
So
But I
That
think-
way, at least it would be considered.
Yeah.
I think for me at least, the important thing to consider is the possibility of protecting and preserving the existing specimen trees wherever possible. And if you can show that for whatever reasons they're diseased, or that there's some issue, or that it's that
They've
there's some other
reached
public
their lifespan.
right, that there's some other public good to be served by eliminating them, then that's okay. But you should have to go through the process, and it shouldn't be, oh, I really want the driveway on the eastern side, not the western side, and this would really mess me up.
Yeah,
It's,
I
it
guess
has to
I'm
be
just
sort of
particularly
more.
worried with the urban center in particular because there's not a lot. There's not a lot you can do to begin with. There's not a lot you can change within a lot to begin with to make it accommodate this. And, like, it's not as easy as saying, oh, well, I'll just move the driveway over here because you're in the middle of the
But by the same
city.
token, there's so few
You know.
specimen trees
Yeah.
that if we're going to ask people subdividing in rural and rural residential areas to actually assess the pre-existing parcel from the standpoint of the assets that you find there, this natural
guess-
assets,
I mean,
then
They
we want
would
to
be able-
identify them
but-
the same way.
I have to honestly say, in the urban center, I mean, the zoning district is pretty tight
Yep.
right
Yeah.
now, and I can't think of what is really
Like-
subdividable right now. That
Right.
Yeah.
So if there is such an instance,
It's-
and they'd go through this exercise and they'd get a waiver,
Right.
And okay.
Right.
if there
Plus,
wasn't
if there's-
anything that they could do about it.
Yeah, if there's no other way to do it, it's a great argument in favor of waiver.
There's probably that.
And all I say is if you are an innovative and thoughtful developer
Big
and
Victorian
you recognize
on the
the
road, that's
virtue or the
sale.
value of
Huge
this
specimen
magnificent,
tree in
these
front of
two
it.
magnificent
People are
trees,
very
then you've got
concerned
these
about
you've got these things that you can literally build around, which should actually turn up in the market price of the project that you ultimately develop. I mean, I think people in the end would prefer some tree cover to no tree cover or something like that. So you should be able to, but it's a judgment the developer needs to make.
So
You've
you'll
been
wrestle
appeased?
with that
I have been
language.
appeased.
Okay.
All right.
What's next?
That was you, right?
Are we
Liz?
content on the waiver language, substituting for the words you don't like?
I'm happy.
And you're going to adjust 4.8 on landscaping a little bit?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Article 5, Sue, why don't you lead off, and then we'll get to commissioners.
Can I just say that I thought 5.1 was really nicely written?
Thank you.
5.1, I think it's great.
Thank you. So here, let's see, we talked about, at the last meeting, we talked about how to make the incentives stronger if the parent parcel is larger. So I made a change to the density incentives on page 22, so it's section C. I added
All right, this is what we had been talking about.
I added section 5.8, which was supporting agricultural use, because when I went through the town plan, we say a lot about that, but that didn't get brought into the subdivision regulations. And then In section 5.7, that is rewritten. And it requires the applicant to provide a design statement as to how they've designed their subdivision. I mean, part of me, I struggled a little bit, so I'm kind of curious of particularly your response because you brought it up. But part of the reason that they're going to go through the site inventory and pull that information together is hopefully in that process they'll be designing a subdivision that will protect the natural resources. But what this requires them is to actually speak to it, so submit it in writing, and that's been useful in the past. We've had
You know, I like it because I
applications
think
explain it.
in this way, if there's competing interests, then they can be weighed.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's definitely more specific than the way it was written
Yeah.
before.
Okay, so, sorry, I assumed you're done.
Yep.
Okay. Commissioners, thoughts? Great job, Sue.
Any thoughts?
That's a thought that I had.
Great job, Sue.
It's a lot, I think it's really become a lot more user-friendly than it was in its first iteration.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, it's a lot cleaner.
Yeah, we've really chewed it apart in lots of ways and rewritten, and you've
It's been
taken
good
our...
discussions, I
Yeah.
think, actually.
I mean, we have very different points of view and people bringing in lots of things, and I think we've really worked it.
Yeah.
And I did like the night, was Tim here? Other input from other, I think we're going to address that next, but
It's a shame we don't get more public in this phase,
I know.
really
Yeah.
think inevitably we'll have public hearings, and then inevitably we'll say,
would you just come up
when
with
did
this?
you come up with that?
Right.
Yeah.
Like as if we're...
It's like everyone yells at
Yeah,
you
we're-
once
like we're
the
hiding in a
application
phone box.
comes
We're all
out.
in
Yeah.
God's office.
That's right.
In a huddle. Right.
So
Like
if
the
you're
town
hearing
plan
that,
was
community,
written
come to our meetings.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, to know that we went through many iterations before we came to this.
And then we thought we were thoughtful.
Yeah.
at least we all have...
Go on.
Yeah.
I mean, we have two DRB people here anyways, but
Yeah, I know
still.
Tim couldn't come tonight, but I know he's got some comments that he wants to share.
Sorry, we should get to Article 6. I didn't mean to break out the champagne glasses.
Oh, there was nothing changed in Article 6 or 7.
Yes, but they might want you to.
Nope.
Yes, they might.
I got nothing.
I got
And
nothing.
then the only other weird thing is the definitions are numbered Article 5.
Yes.
That's okay.
So that should
Boy,
be
I
Article
thought-
Weird.
7.
Like there's something built into our computers that keeps on generating.
No, it's because I wrote them in different things.
Yeah, Article. So it should be Article 7. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
this is really
What are you,
not
Canadian now?
important, but I think at the beginning, there should be a note that the definitions are in the back.
Okay.
The definition. What did you just say?
I
about
think at the
definition?
very beginning, there should be a note informing the reader that there are definitions at the back, so that as they read through that afterwards, they know they can check
So they're
that.
struggling and they're tearing their hair out and they come
And then they get to the end
all
out, why did they tell me that in the beginning?
Yeah. It's probably just
Ever
stylistic.
Yeah, do you
ever since
prefer, I
that
mean, we
guy Ford
could
from
put
Toronto
definitions
said
up
my role
front.
model.
That is.
I
it's-
prefer definitions first, but that's because that's what I'm used to, because that's what the legislature does. I'm fine with them in the back. I just think that
Yeah.
if you got Joe Schmo, who has never done a subdivision, and picks this up, he's going to find a number of terms that are challenging.
I mean, I think given that we don't have it's 3 pages of definitions, I don't have a problem moving them up front. I've written regulations. both
I'd rather
ways.
just reference that in the beginning.
I actually agree. I think having our statement of purpose
Yeah,
in
I
the
think-
beginning is good.
Yeah, I think so,
wouldn't
too.
want that to be this big-
Well, it would be Article 2.
Oh, I see what you
It
mean.
would be after the.
Nah, I don't. I think it disrupts the flow.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah, I
think so, too.
Okay.
I just want people to know their background.
Yeah,
and their
no,
reasons.
definitely. Yeah, I agree.
Oh, sorry. We really only made 2 minor changes here. And I'm wondering if we can tighten our schedule and have our next meeting be a public meeting. Although, keep in mind, I don't quite remember what the notice requirements are.
That's okay. Let's talk about it a different way for a little while.
Yeah.
Because as it stands, I think we're ready to approve this draft.
Yeah.
Except you want to do some more public education, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would prefer, moves us on to the next agenda item. I think that, just like you said, we haven't had a lot of participation at the meetings, and we haven't really done any outreach either. I mean, I've talked about it a little bit with the Conservation Commission and with the Ag Advisory Committee, but haven't really made a presentation on it or anything. I think we need to do a little of that. I would prefer that we get those comments in before the public hearing. I don't want surprises at a public hearing or,
I agree.
you know,
Okay.
pulling it apart. For subdivision and zoning, it's a 15-day warn, and then we can have our hearing, make a vote, turn it over to the select board. They have a 15-day warn.
Is it 2 or 1?
One.
One.
Oh.
One each.
So it's a lot shorter adoption process than the town plan.
Yeah, I'm still in that mode, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah, that is a lot.
You better get out of it.
Well, it was just excruciating to me.
Yes.
Yeah, it was.
Well, the way that got elongated was also really problematic. But I would say, you know, Sue and I spent a bit of time reflecting on how that went in the office. You know,
I bet you did.
yeah, I was using a nice word too. And I think even psychologically, it's important to circulate this draft amongst various stakeholders and encourage the public to comment on the draft. Clear that it's draft even still in the Planning Commission's minds, and that they have the opportunity to comment or provide feedback, and that could influence the final language that the Planning
Yes.
Commission would warn.
Are we in the same situation where if we went to a public hearing and the public made a suggestion that prompted us to make a major change, we would have to have another public hearing? Not sure.
I'm not sure about
Yeah,
that.
I doubt it, to be honest.
I mean, if you made a major change, you'd probably want to.
Yes.
Just to give other people the opportunity.
Okay.
I mean,
I don't think it's true I don't think the statute calls for that or requires it, because I also think that it's a little bit more problematic because they don't define what a substantive change is. You know, so in other words, is changing the minimum parcel size from 5 to 10 acres, is that substantial or not? You know, it gets a little weird.
Okay.
So, but I would say if we encounter a point, or you know, if we encounter a lot of reaction and we want to basically flip something or change something dramatically, it might be useful to contemplate a subsequent public hearing.
Okay.
Right.
You know what? I'm sorry. I've kind of got this started off and realized I shouldn't have. So, do you want
You got to
to
back up.
give us a detail? Or whoever's doing it?
Isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in my
Sorry.
mind, what I it's fine that we just jumped into the conversation. I think that what I'd like to see the Planning Commission do is we should identify some stakeholders. We should make an effort to go to them. Not, you know, it's fine if we have take our next meeting and make it big and everybody knows we're talking about it and making a presentation on it and accepting feedback. But I also think we need to get to people. I think it
include
needs
a press release and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to get out to people. It needs to be, you know, maybe a staff member and 2 planning commissioners. I think we need to take ownership of it, make a presentation. I can put together a PowerPoint, but
I do agree. I want as many people to know about it, and I wish that this room was filled tonight, or at least that there was one person in this room.
Don't get too ambitious here.
But I also worry about us spending a lot of time and energy on something that like is really, if you have an interest into it, you need to come to the meetings. You know,
Yeah.
I want us to bounce both, educate, but at the same time, like, let's not pull our hair out about hunting down every stakeholder in the.
yeah, I would agree. But I mean,
community,
I think
you know?
that there's some, you know, we're proposing something really different for
Yeah.
the western part of town.
Yeah.
You know, when we took the town plan up and we talked about increasing the minimum lot size, I mean, it only takes 1 or 2 people to kind of make it go in a different direction.
Yeah, there
once
was a lot of
it's-
sentiment
once it's
around
before.
those
Yeah,
kinds
I mean,
of
I think-
things. So
I think we need to maybe
I just don't want to
You know,
delay
West
forever
Brattleboro
because we're
Association-
trying to educate, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree, but I think that if we take, you know, November, December, and then, I know that's a
Yeah.
tough time of year
Yeah.
too, but,
Yeah.
you know, we can have
Yeah.
some, you know, meetings. I've got a Conservation Commission meeting in December, the Agricultural Advisory, I've already told them I probably want to present, so, you know, I think
Right.
the Ag Advisory
Yeah.
could be important.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it is.
I
I
think
think we
it-
should do that because I think when we had the town plan, you know, the select board was content to have us do our job until we did our job. and then they wanted to scrutinize it. So I think it's important for us to raise the red flag and say, we got something here. You should take a look at
Right.
it.
Yes.
And now's the time.
Right. And I think
Because
that-
otherwise they
Right.
would be unaware.
And I think the position of the planning commission is strengthened
Yeah.
when it goes before the select board, and I'm using that terminology really advisedly. When there are people present in the room,
Yeah.
before the select board willing to speak in support of the suggested
I just
changes.
don't want to be stuck.
Right.
I just don't want to be stuck on this for the next 5-6 months because
No,
No.
believe me, no.
Bless you.
But you see, we think that one of the factors that led to the stretching out there were lots of factors that led to the stretching out of the public hearings on the town plan, but one of them was potentially that we did not have advocates for the language exactly as we had proposed in the room every time.
Yeah.
So in other words, the select board could look up and go, so it's just you guys saying that, right? And they were like, yeah, look, there's no one else here. And so if there had been a broader demonstration of support in the room from stakeholders and from affected parties for the language that we had crafted for the town plan, then the select board would have been actually observing a groundswell of support for the town plan as it was drafted. But in the end, it was just the work of the planning commission that they got to review and go, oh, I'm not sure about that one. You know, and so that was the limit of the discussion to some extent. So I think that what we're looking for is an active outreach process that leads to having a broad
An understanding
Yeah,
of
no,
Yes.
what we've done.
and then people being able to speak, not just not comment negatively, but speak positively about the suggested change. I mean, I
And
think
people will
there's a
have
big difference.
questions too. I mean, just like
Right.
we
Yeah.
question different
Yeah.
things and why we did it and how we came about that. And I think,
Just the whole mechanics of how to do subdivision in the first place, the whole density calculation thing is, you know, if you think about how much time people who sit in this room and who have self-selected because we like talking about these things and like thinking about these things, if you think about how much time we've spent grappling with how to actually describe in words what we want to do, that process alone, I think, is going to take some time for the public to digest.
yeah.
Well, and I
Plus-
think understanding exactly, you know, we need to give an opportunity for people that it is making a change for it is to really understand what's happening with their land, and
Yeah.
fortunately,
Yeah, and
we're
what
armed
goals-
with good data for
And
that.
what goals we're trying to achieve. I
Right.
think that's very important
Yeah.
because
Right.
I think that's what the select board issue was. What goals and how does this meet those goals?
Yeah.
And I think for when you had different examples, and maybe you can't do this at the, I don't know if you can do a specific that's real to Brattleboro, but showing examples, having visuals, demonstrating how those density things work. I mean, that would be really helpful. I mean, that, for me, that helps. I read all this and I go, sometimes, but then when you put it out there in a different way with a picture and explain it or go
Right.
through the chart,
Yeah.
then it makes much more sense. And I think that would be very useful in these cases because,
Right.
and to show how we're really, we're trying to be aware of the land itself, but we're also trying to not make it hard for a developer, unduly hard for a developer. We're taking that, because
Into
sometimes,
consideration.
yeah, because sometimes people paint a planning commission as, you know,
Just regulating.
regulate, and people get really upset about that. And there are people in this town who would rather have no regulations, and that we're really coming from a very learned and understanding place, and we want to make it so it's user-friendly and
And I
good for the developer.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've stripped a lot out, actually, to try to simplify and
Yes.
not overregulate.
Right. And I think we can do I think speaking on, in terms of the staff and what the office can do and probably, and in my mind, I think needs to do. Right now, we are, we have amassed lots of really good graphical information. So the summer exercise with Isabel is, hugely valuable. We've got a lot of resources that we didn't have, before this project started. We've not had the time to sit and consider how to actually turn that information into effective presentations to the public. We've
She's
worked,
coming back.
I know. That's good. We're looking forward to it.
Good.
And so we feel like, we've got the ability to present information in a really effective and persuasive manner. And what we, think the process would benefit from is spending more time doing that, which will also ultimately refine a presentation made to the select board.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and what we haven't done so far, when we've been engaged in this fairly technical kind of dialogue with the Planning Commission about the contents of the subdivision regulations and the implications of it, and we've worked it through with you, so to the point where you're all happy with it. But now we have to figure out how to sort of develop the same process that would be persuasive and explanatory for the public, which
Yes.
is a different group altogether.
Okay.
And so I think it's going to take some time on our part and making it a priority on our part in the office, and then coming up with meaningful, targeted groups.
So basically, you're going to set it off 2 months.
Well, I
The
thought Sue
hearing,
was
you
saying
mean?
that she's got.
Yeah.
I'd like a
other
public hearing
committees.
in January.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that
it
makes
might
sense.
be the latter part of January.
Yeah, it's 2 months.
Month and a half.
Am I using the wrong calendar here?
No, it's a month and a half.
Okay.
But Christmas, the holidays, we got a lot of holidays,
Two
and
meetings.
people are busy and all in this
Yeah.
next,
Ish,
coming
yeah,
up 6
yeah.
weeks,
I-
so.
I
Next
can
meeting's on
see-
December 16th.
Yeah, see, we have
Yeah.
a meeting in December. Maybe we take,
Yeah.
I'm just
So,
clarifying.
and what we should,
It
why
might
don't
be a
we-
second meeting in January that we
Right.
have
Right.
a public
Why don't we
hearing.
set ourselves
Yeah,
a
select
target
boards
of
do a
coming
budget
to you
stuff.
with a packet of information that at the next meeting, which
Right.
is
The 16th.
the 16th.
Mhm.
And then I think the key thing for us also is to actually have the public identify with planning commissioners, as people involved in the process, rather than it be viewed as a sort of a technical document that's been produced by staff. So,
Can we be prepared in these, for the slim possibility that if we don't get a good crowd at the next meeting, the December meeting, we can cut into some other to-do project?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, and there's some realities that are sort of biting us a little bit from, the budget is going to be grueling this year, probably not as time consuming as last year, but still grueling and unknown in terms of the commitments and the, of my time in particular on that. There's scheduling some meetings, both public and kind of work meetings now that'll basically dominate the rest of the month. So the select board's got that on their plate, and then the town manager position is still to be resolved. There's just a bunch of stuff here
Right.
that
There's
is.
a possible grant.
There's a possible grant that that we want to pursue that's going to be time consuming. There's some things there that are just sort of in the way, but also need to be that we can address. That are sort of beyond our control.
Okay, well, let's put that to bed, unless anybody has anything else to say
Oh,
about it.
I got the impression when Sue was talking about going to these other meetings, you're going to solicit comments from the Ag Committee and the.
Yeah,
That's
I
going to
mean-
be like now?
Well, I think it would be after the presentation materials that,
I'm prepared.
are prepared, and,
Great.
it would be great
Yep.
to have Commissioner with me.
Right.
To hear it, to take in the comments too. But,
Mhm.
Maybe Conservation Commission is the first one we can demo with it with. I'm not sure the December meeting.
I mean-
It's probably going to be the week of Christmas, so.
Yeah, I mean,
Might
this
get
is,
moved.
as much
We
as
should-
it's
we should
simplified,
get that
it's,
out.
Oh, it'll be on
Sooner rather
Christmas
than
Eve.
later.
December
Oh, that's
24th.
Well, that'll
It
be a
will be
very
moved.
popular meeting.
Well, we could do it on New Year's Eve instead.
come dressed up.
Oh, oh, oh.
I thought that was-
Yeah. So we need to schedule that a little more carefully.
Yes, it's
All
gonna,
right.
it's gonna go into the new year more.
You can shoot an email around when you're going to do that. We can see
All right.
if one of us can tag along.
Yeah, I mean. if-
Yeah, I'll come to
if
one of those
schedule permitting,
conservation
I
or ag
would.
meetings.
Right.
Perhaps even two
Or
or
both.
three of us.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah,
would be good.
definitely. At least
And
Yeah.
this is pretty, I mean, I'll speak for myself, I mean, a lot, like I said already, a lot of this is technical, and to me, it gets understood sometimes in the talking about it and in making examples, and I think for some people on these other committees and stuff, that's gonna be the same thing, they're gonna look at it and go, you know, and so
Yeah.
like,
Well, the rural, the two-tiered
Yeah, I mean, I think that
standard,
that's where.
a little-
So the
I think that's where it's
presentation
focused.
to-
I mean, you know, the administrative stuff, I don't think, that's not
Nobody really
important.
cares.
That's
To me,
inside
it's,
baseball stuff.
Yeah.
to me, it's, we're trying to look at
well,
kind of
yeah,
neighborhood subdivisions and then the more rural and.
yeah,
go
you'll know
that
how
way.
to outline that, yeah.
Let's cross that bridge when we
Yeah,
get there.
great, thanks.
Zoning bylaw rewrite outline,
Yeah.
ZBRO. What's going on?
ZBR. Well, we just, we weren't sure,
We hadn't checked in with you very much at all about where our thoughts were with this, and
it's coming up.
yeah, so it's the next project up for us that's major with the Planning Commission. The first element, so that you know, we were able to obtain a commitment from the Select Board of $30,000 towards outside help, if you like, consulting to rewrite the zoning bylaw. And
This, in very broad terms, is our simplification project.
Yes.
yes, and so what we realized even when we were making that request is that was, nowhere near enough. So to put it in broad terms, South Burlington, which of course is nothing like Brattleboro, but nevertheless is a community in Vermont, dedicated $200,000 to their zoning bylaw rewrite.
Jesus.
Now, there's actually, I got my first viewer response from someone who watches us on BCTV, and she asked me, what does the planning department need the grant money for the zoning rewrite?
Oh, good.
So I bet she's watching right now, so, and I'm kind of curious myself because I didn't really know the answer, so if you could.
So what we chose to do with the request of $30,000 was to recognize that we were going to need to leverage that. And so the first thing that we've done is we've submitted a municipal planning grant for the maximum amount, which is $20,000, and that would require a match. So some of that $30,000, $6,000, that will go towards the match for the $20,000, assuming we get the municipal planning grant. That would enable us to retain a consultant that could look at various subsets of the bylaw.
We wrote that primarily to have assistance in defining the zoning districts and then the
Right.
regulations for the zoning
Right.
districts.
Would
So
it be similar to what Roger Hawk did when we looked at Putney Road for the
yes,
town plan?
yes, it would be more intensive and kind of longer in duration.
More specific.
More specific, but generally following that approach.
Okay.
And so that was the first thing that we did to kind of mobilize that $30,000. That leaves us with about roughly $24,000 to spend, assuming that we get the grant for $20,000. It conforms with the state's stated priorities, so we're reasonably comfortable that we'll get something. The question is whether we get $20,000 or not. We'll know in a couple of weeks.
In a couple of weeks.
So the other objective is to write a request for proposals for that other $24,000, and there we're looking to retain a consultant that would look at the special flood hazard area, the sort of the hazard aspects of the of the bylaw, right?
Not the special part of it.
Is it your intent that it would be an overlay when I realize this is early time to ask this question, but are you guys still thinking overlay is the way to go? Except the overlay would be over all the flood hazard areas rather than just the Whetstone corridor?
For the
Fluvial
fluvial
erosion.
erosion hazard layer.
Yeah.
It would be an overlay.
It would be an overlay anyway.
Am I being overly ambitious in assuming that that's going to be part of this?
Potentially.
Potentially, the complexity of that part of the project is really
Huge, I would
huge.
guess.
So, other and different communities that we know about have approached that aspect in a different way. So we're still trying to sort of scope out exactly what we would get and what kind of consultants we would need to get to achieve the kind of work that we need to get done there.
Yeah. And further, how far we could push any regulations
Right.
away from the state's model.
Right.
and
So one of the stakeholders that we have there is the state, because the state has model regulations, which to some extent have received sort of a level of approval from FEMA. So if you move away from that model language, you move into this kind of gray zone where no one really knows how that would stand up in legal cases. And so, but then then what we also know is that communities that have adopted fluvial erosion hazard have adopted an overlay map that's very focused. So, for instance, the one in Middlebury covers 9 private parcels. The one in Bennington mostly is dominated by publicly owned land.
Yeah.
And so when we had the interim ordinance here, it impacted more than 150 private property owners. So we're dealing with a level of magnitude and complexity here of enforcement and monitoring and the politics of it that are just off the scale compared to what other communities have successfully achieved. So in that consulting process and in the sort of the design of the language and then also the design of the overlay, we've got some really serious things to work out. And so that's why we're a little reluctant or hesitant to be able to sort of say confidently what the scope of that project is right now.
So my dream of resurrecting the overlay, naming it the Goodamount Law, and simply putting it through as part of this is dead.
I think you should hold on to the ambition of calling something the Goodamount Law.
Yes.
But we'll see exactly what that entails later.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's that piece, and then so the funding question in the subsequent budget year, which we're now kind of in the process of negotiating, as fiscal year 2015, there's a further allocation of $25,000 towards zoning ordinance or zoning bylaw rewrite, and so. Again, the idea would be to try and leverage that. We've looked at other funding opportunities, and nothing's jumping out at us right now. But that we haven't exhausted all our possibilities yet. We took a serious look at some hazard mitigation stuff, but discovered that it wasn't really a good fit for what we're trying to do. But so a lot of what we're trying to do in the office, when we're not, is look at ways in which we can. Bring enough resources together to manage the zoning bylaw rewrite project, which we think is going to be pretty big. Part of that, and particularly the part to go back to the fluvial erosion hazard component, or that what we would probably prefer just to call a hazard component, is the level of education that the public is going to need to feel comfortable with making any move in that direction, and the skills that we're going to have to bring to bear to make that effective.
Yeah.
So our experience the last time around,
We should call that the flood prevention zone, not the fluvial erosion hazard.
That's right. That's
Right.
right. Good
I
point.
don't think we're going to prevent
yeah, I don't think we're going to prevent anything. That's one of the issues.
Well,
Going to prevent damage.
no, but the idea of the whole thing is to prevent flooding in the long run by creating more places for the waterway to store the extra water, thus reducing the speed of the flood when it's in town.
I think we're trying to reduce the hazard
Right.
or the risk.
We're
Flood
trying to
risk
reduce
reduction zone.
we're trying to reduce the exposure to risk.
Yes.
Or to be even more technically correct about it, we are trying to minimize the growth in exposure to the risk.
And it's funny because Brattleboro has such an interesting history with exposure.
Right. in all possible
Yes,
ways.
really.
Actually, now that I think about
My
it,
mind
thank
goes
you
in
so
a lot
much.
of ways.
Took me a minute
Yeah.
there.
That's really a good point. So, and we have eliminated or made illegal some forms of exposure, but we still need to work on others. So,
So we need more than a fig leaf for this flood.
That's right.
very good. Okay, so that's the funding piece, which is what we're trying to do here is define the limits of the project, if you like, and then try and find the resources that are necessary to make that happen.
Well, just to make it clear, I mean, this is an entire rewrite. This is
Right.
not, let's tinker with
Right.
certain sections. It's kind of like, this was great, we need something new.
So
It's-
everything's
it's
up for grabs.
massive.
The boundaries are up for grabs. The,
Sure.
the definitions, the description of the of the districts. Everything is just like
All that
totally
little stuff
open.
we looked at
It's
when we were doing the
huge.
town
Is there-
plan
Yeah.
is gonna get,
Is there some low-hanging fruit present that we can address before we finish with our consulting work? Like at the next meeting, if
Yes.
nobody shows up,
Yep.
We could do
can you guys
administrative
come and
stuff.
say, listen, guys, this stuff
Right.
is really makes no sense, like where the zones
Mhm.
end in the middle of parcels?
I don't think we're ready to deal with zoning districts. I don't.
Right.
But I think there's administrative
Yeah.
stuff that we could clean
Okay.
up.
So there's zoning and there's flood. What about site plan? Is that on the?
but what?
That
That
would
site
be
plan's
the
part of it.
Site
Yeah.
plan part.
That'd be a separate issue.
Yeah.
Within the zoning
Um,
ordinance rewrite.
Yeah,
So-
so absolutely, there's,
Right.
we can
And then our
start.
work is done and we disband the planning commission.
Yeah. I mean,
After
you
5
might not
years,
know the solution,
time to write the
but
plan-
obviously
town
you
plan
know that
again.
there are problems present.
I think that one of the things that we could do is that you described as low-hanging fruit. We've been collecting on Post-it notes and various ways in the office. Every time somebody finds something egregious or weird on an administrative level, we write it down. And so I'm sure the DIB members have got the same thing. There's plenty of people that can
Yeah.
provide us with examples
Well,
of things that are clunky or
I
ineffective.
had mentioned to you that something that at least the select board recently stumbled over very hard was outdoor seating for restaurants and bars on public rights of way, which happens extensively in other cities, like
Right.
Burlington, as an example.
Where is that? Where's Bill?
New York.
But we have absolutely zero regulations regarding it, and
Right.
outdoor dining, particularly on city streets or city sidewalks
Right.
and stuff like that, is becoming more and more popular for establishments. So
I
that
don't think we can regulate that over the select board's head, though.
well, they only did it because we have absolutely we have nothing pertaining to like what's the allowable square footage and stuff.
So it
I
would
might
be like those
I'm
food vendors that the
kinda
select
like-
board will ask us to address it.
yeah.
That would be one. That would be one possible approach.
I
what
mean,
could just-
I may be incorrect in this, but if I'm remembering correctly, they even said at the select board meeting, well, there's no planning regulations on this, so we have to. At one point, they were leaving it up to the fire chief to decide how much space they should take up on the sidewalk, like letting them be the arbiters of that, not necessarily taking into consideration their input. Like at one point, it was like 2 or 3 different town departments were being the arbiters of how this business could, how much space this business could have outside, and one person was deciding how much space they could have outside and stuff like that.
This is under our authority? I mean, it's there,
On
right?
private property, not on public.
Yeah,
He's
ironically,
talking
yes.
about public.
Yes.
I am talking about public.
Well,
The public sidewalk.
Right.
in front of
Private,
private
I
property.
understand it's our.
I would say there's informal acceptance of tables and chairs outside eateries on Main Street. And those tables and chairs are situated on town property. So that's between
Right.
Elliott and High.
I understand that. I'm just saying we can't write an ordinance that says you can put your stuff on public land because
No,
the
we can't.
the
We
select
can deal
board
with
gets
it.
to say what
Right.
can
And in the
can't
instance
happen
of
on the land.
in the instance of the one in the Harmony lot, there's the parcel boundary of that for that building includes part of the sidewalk, and so I kid you not. So the permit as written and the development as it exists is entirely on private property.
Well, they-
And that's the, and
But
that
for
was
public,
the
I don't think
We can.
and
Yeah,
so
we can.
we have a horse in that race.
and so if the
They might wish we did, but.
right, so if the town was to develop some kind of set of policies on outdoor dining or whatever on publicly on property, then it would be something that the select board would need to determine that they wanted to do. They could direct the planning commission to develop appropriate, guidance, or not, but it's definitely the jurisdiction of the select board. And because it's public property and they are the ultimate guardians of public property. Right? So in this instance, the Harmony lot is owned entirely by the town, including the sidewalk, except for those pieces that are owned by the buildings.
The only thing we could do would be say in the urban center zone, you can't have outdoor seating anyway. No, that would cover it.
Well, there's,
Yeah.
But why would we do that?
That's kind of mean.
right.
Right.
But I think, to David's point, in a broader scale, I think that at least the DRB chair has been anxious to have a joint meeting and be able to discuss some of the issues
Right.
that they have with the zoning ordinance. So that's, a good early step that we should be doing.
Yep.
And I think that we want to, through the zoning rewrite, we do want to have a good public engagement, and of course, it has to be couched in some different way. Obviously, zoning is not exciting, just as subdivision regulations aren't exciting, but we need to get the feedback.
Right. So again, we're exploring ways in which the public outreach is going to be effective, and it'll be very similar to the town plan in the sense that this is a marathon more than a sprint.
Not as long as the town plan.
Not as long as the town plan.
Which
but
is
Thank you.
hence bringing consultants in to be able to work on pieces to move it along.
Right.
How long will it be until we get something back from the consultants, assuming everything happens the way we hope it will?
We go out to bid and get consultants signed up by mid-January, or late January, which is our expectation.
Okay.
We looked at a schedule where end of summer we'd have both kind of time, both be over by then. And so we tried. We've been playing with timetables that would have, first of all, one project, one consulting project feeds into the other, so we want an overlap between the consultants so that they actually get to interface a little, and then, but then also keep their work product schedules separate enough so that we can handle the dominant load from one first and then turn our attention to the other. So end of summer.
Will we know by, say, the summer if the Hinsdale Bridge, where the Hinsdale Bridge is going to be built, and is the Putney Road project finalized enough that we can plan based on that?
I'm going to answer
now
the
we're
reverse
dreaming.
order. Second, the Putney Road, no. I would say that
the funds have been allocated.
No, not for Putney Road.
I
No.
thought preliminary funds had been allocated for acquisition of the properties.
No.
I think the only thing that's happened is that they've funded themselves to continue engineering.
Yes.
That's the
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. The extent of the commitment is that there's a team of people working on the Putney Road reconstruction project, and they're still doing it. The commitment of resources
It's
to
going to be the most massive right away.
yeah.
Ever.
Possibly in the
For
state.
here.
Possibly in the state. They
What was it, 2 out of the 23 million for rights away?
more than that.
Was it
Yeah,
what?
that
And
was
they
And then
keep-
there's blasting. Blasting was a huge piece of it.
Although there are a ton of crashes at that rock that they want to blast.
Anyways, the bridge.
Well,
So the
How
Hinsdale
many
Bridge.
times you crash into it, it doesn't prevent the need for blasting.
We can get a big truck.
With explosives.
The conceptual plan for the Hinsdale Bridge is in. The right-of-way impacts on the New Hampshire side are established, and my understanding is that New Hampshire is moving towards getting the right-of-ways organized. They're down for a 2018 schedule, I think, of construction.
I think so. Which would be 2015 here for
Yeah, which means that this
right-of-way work.
right-of-way work would proceed on the Vermont side in 2015, assuming that VTrans makes that commitment.
That's soon.
Yes. And so
I'm more worried about New Hampshire. not making the financial commitment.
Yeah,
to be
well,
honest with
They had
you.
their stuff together on Chesterfield way
Well,
before us.
well, no,
Right.
I'm just saying
Yeah, but
they've been pushing
transportation-
off and
well,
pushing
their
off and pushing
transportation
off.
shortfall is just.
Is it
it's
worse than
huge.
ours?
It's huge.
Yeah.
Even with Irene?
That's because they refuse to raise any gas
The
taxes.
gas
Oh,
tax
yeah.
hasn't been raised since, I don't know,
Live for
80s
your
or-
life.
And there's
means
there's
no
very
bridges.
little appetite.
That's right.
From
No
the people
tax.
for
No
that
tax.
to happen.
No tax
I saw-
shire.
Their gas taxes are higher than ours.
Yep.
It is, but I don't see them raising it anytime.
So what I'd say there is, both state legislatures are under enormous pressure.
Yeah.
I'm mildly confident that the Hinsdale Bridge would happen in 2018. And if you think about it in terms of sort of paperwork, the commitment to the New Hampshire commitment to that bridge is actually on a desk, so it's slated. It's
in the plan.
It's in a plan.
They
The
don't commit, it's not in the plan.
right, the Putney Road is not in a plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Third,
So
sorry.
yeah, so the
But isn't it in
if
there
it-
like 20 some? See, I didn't think it was happening that quick. I thought they had pushed it off into the 2020s.
Hinsdale?
Hinsdale?
No.
Well, not Hinsdale,
Hampshire.
New Hampshire had pushed off the funding.
Well, it
for
had
that.
for a
No,
long
it's in
time
the
been on the
10-year
bottom of the
plan.
list, but it had been brought back up
Yeah.
again.
Well, which
Yeah, it came back
Right.
up.
yeah,
right.
technically.
So and the Putney Road plan has not had the same
yeah.
increase in commitment. So
That's
Is
all
it
right.
still on the other side of the DRM, the Holstein building?
Yes.
yes,
Is the plan that I think has always been dead to link 91 to that bridge?
Yeah,
it still remains very dead.
Very,
It's
very
very
dead.
dead and it's not
I would
gonna.
Even
say-
though that
I would
property's
say
going to
that
be
it-
for sale? Familari property.
Yeah, I would say that just the memory of that dispute has gone with Joe Familari. So I wasn't around. None of us were around. We were probably all still in school when that was unfolding.
They had a lot of. There was talk about building another freeway exit up between two exits in Chittenden County recently, before you get into Burlington or any of that. I think I don't know. But it was like 15 or 4, I don't know what exit. And it was like the governor even said that they're not adding any more exits to any interstates.
Well, I don't mean that.
You know.
There was an idea where instead of the interstate funneling into town through Canal, when the Hinsdale Bridge was built, it would go like around the back of South Main, straight into the Hinsdale Bridge. So people
Basically
wouldn't
a
come
highway
into the
exit?
five-way intersection. They'd
All right,
bypass
I
it.
think that's off the table. I don't
Yeah.
think
Yeah,
there's
that
any
was-
traction
no.
for that at all.
No,
It's
no
unfortunate,
great
but-
Well,
ambitious
but there's a
projects.
certain amount of people that we want people to funnel into town.
I'm not saying it's a good
Yeah.
plan, but these are
Yeah.
the things I think about when we're rewriting the whole zoning bylaws, because
If there's big projects coming,
Will they
we could take
impact?
that. Yeah.
Right.
There's no so to take it back to the sort of VTrans style planning process. What we have for Putney Road right now is a conceptual plan, and they are working on preliminary engineering as a consequence of the 509C meeting that they had, or whatever it was. And then after, as they proceed with the preliminary engineering, they'll then take on the commitment to do right-of-way acquisition, assuming that they're still going to get an allocation. So, we're talking about several staff making, significant commitments every week or month to the project to push it forward. There's not even so much as a sketch
right.
for the idea of exit 1 linking down to the Hinsdale Bridge at South Main. So even if you started pushing for it tomorrow, it's like 40 years ago.
I'm not suggesting it should happen.
Yeah. No, but just it's that off the table.
Okay.
Are we ready to be done?
There's no other business.
I thank you guys for really looking ahead at the schedule and how it all fits together. I mean,
fine.
that in itself is huge, and how to
Yeah.
look at putting all these things together. It sounds like you're really doing that. So getting ready to do our next piece of work,
Yep.
but thank you.
Nice to knock off a few little things too.
It'd be great.
Yeah. Not be
Great.
feel like we're bogged down in one subject for months on end.
We still need that motion to adjourn.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
A second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.